Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're so glad to welcome you as part of our community tonight. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and distributed live stream. By entering this virtual meeting room, you give your consent to be recorded and distributed by Simeon Morrow Public Speaking Presentations, Vienna Live with Simeon Morrow, and other third parties. If you prefer to not be recorded and distributed, please go to the Facebook Live video feed, the link to which I'll now place in the chat room. For a better experience, please turn off your microphone and set your video to gallery view. This show thrives on participant contributions, and all participants are encouraged to actively participate in this webinar by asking questions and making comments. To do so, please either write in the chat room, raise your hand, or turn on your microphone and say hi, and I'll be delighted to include your perspective in the conversation. Tonight, our featured guest is Frank Villella, a singer and director of the Rosenthal Archives of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra Association. Frank, welcome.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here again.
So Frank, tell us a little bit about how you got involved with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. If you come from Chicago, I don't know, I imagine it's a big thing. How did you first get involved?
Sure. So I first came to what we call the Chicago Symphony Orchestra family, actually as a member of the Chicago Symphony Chorus. I'm originally from Southwestern Ohio. I got my first degree from Miami University in Ohio. Then I moved to Chicago to start my second degree at DePaul University in vocal performance. And as I was wrapping that degree in the spring of 1992, I auditioned for and got into the Chicago Symphony Chorus, hired by the legendary Margaret Hillis, who was the subject of one of these previous shows. So during my first season in the chorus, frequently they would have on the bulletin board at rehearsal, there would be sometimes job postings for jobs with the CSOA Association. And one of those jobs in the fall of 1992 was a part-time cataloger, reference assistant in the Rosenthal, sorry, it was the archive, just the CSO archives then. We were later named the Rosenthal Archives in the mid-90s. So I applied for the job, interviewed, and I actually didn't get it the first time. So springtime rolled around, spring of 1993, I noticed that the job was posted again. So applied a second time, interviewed a second time. And I distinctly remember at the end of my interview asking Brenda, who was the founding archivist here, I said, what do I have to, she said, do you have any other questions for me? And I said, yes, what do I have to say for you to hire me for this job? And somehow I was able to convince her. And later that day, I got an offer. So I started off as a part-time cataloger, processor, reference assistant. I had never set foot in an archive before my interview. My degree and background was in performance. So I had a general knowledge of the industry and the repertoire, but not of an archival facility. So all of my training, in essence, in addition to conferences and seminars and certifications and stuff like that, all of my serious experience has been on the job. I worked together with Brenda for 10 years. By the mid-1990s, we had received a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities to start our online catalog. We were the first American orchestra to receive funding for a project like that. And we were able to hire a couple of additional archivists. By that time, I had become full-time. So in the mid-90s until early 2002, we had 4 full-time archivists here working on the catalog, working on the collection, a part-time exhibit designer, a part-time sound engineer, an army of volunteers, etc. Then after September 11, 2001, the economy, of course, took a little bit of a nosedive. Not-for-profits were hurt pretty seriously. We had to lay off about 20% of our administrative staff. here at the CSO. So the two full-time archivists who had been hired after me, we had to lay off, and I stayed on. We had to lay off our audio engineer. Our exhibit designer unfortunately passed away. So then we were down to a department of 2 plus a few volunteers. And then during that next year, 2002 into 2003, Brenda Nelson Strauss, who had started the facility here, her husband got a job at Indiana University as head of the recording engineering faculty there. So Brenda resigned her post. The family relocated to Bloomington, and I was promoted but not replaced. So I've been an army of one since the spring of 2003, which is 20 years ago now, which doesn't seem possible. I still have interns and volunteers, but we have scaled back our operation a little bit. We didn't deaccession any of the collection. The collection remained intact, but the staffing trimmed down just a little bit. So yeah, I just recently celebrated 30 years here, which, like I said, doesn't seem possible. I sang in the chorus for 20 seasons. I left the chorus in October of 2012. So I did 20 solid seasons in the chorus, sang under Hillis for my first 2 years in the chorus were her last 2 years as director. So I had the privilege of singing under Sir George Schulte, Daniel Barenboim, Pierre Boulez, Bernard Haitink, James Conlon, Christoph Eschenbach, Zubin Mehta, Herbert Blomstedt, and of course, Riccardo Muti. My first gig with the chorus was the summer of 1992, Mahler's 8th Symphony with James Levine conducting Trial by Fire. Fantastic experience. I was on stage with 600 people, and I was afraid I was going to sing a wrong note and ruin the whole performance. I don't think that happened. But then my last gig was Carnegie Hall, October 2012, Carmina Burana under Muti. I thought that was a nice way to sneak out the back door. So I left the chorus, but I stayed in the archives, of course. I still sing. I sing. I have a church gig, a temple job during the high holidays. I sing with a couple of smaller chamber ensembles, Bella Voce and the William Ferris Chorale. I do some studio work for a Catholic music publisher. So I'm still singing, just not with the chorus. But now I still have many friends in the chorus, of course, and it's fun to sit out in the audience and actually hear, some of these works that I sang so many times.
Wow, congratulations. What a fantastic career. So
Yeah,
let's see.
I'm tremendously lucky. I'm the first one to admit that. I like to think that I never take that for granted, but I'm very lucky to sit in this chair.
So let's see a little bit of the work Frank has been doing, what his work is all about, just as just one example. Okay, so there we have Andre Previn conducting from 1966, Chicago Symphony Orchestra. So this brings us to our roundtable. What does an archivist do? So I'm going to bring us to our,
Actually, can I say a few things about the
by all
video
means,
that we just saw? I picked that for a couple of reasons. During COVID, of course, when we weren't producing concerts, we were trying to get as much of our content, trying to get a whole bunch of content online so we could still engage our patrons. And one way to do that, of course, was to dig into the archives and pull out some historic videos and audio. So we digitized a number of the television shows that we had in our collection, many shows that hadn't been seen since they were originally aired in the 1950s and 1960s. This is one that we digitized, but we didn't produce on the website. So that's one of the reasons why I picked it for today. It's actually from 1962. It's Andre Previn as a guest conductor. I think he's 32, 33 years old at the time. And of course, Bernstein's Overture to Candide would have only been, 5, 6 years old at this time. So this is kind of new music. But one of the great things about this video, this was taped in the WGN studios, part of the series Great Music from Chicago, which ran from 1952 until 1963. But one of the reasons I picked this is because it shows, if you're a CSO fan, you can see a lot of famous faces. Of course, Stephen Starrick as concertmaster, John Weicker as principal second, Donald Peck, who just passed away a couple of years ago, principal flute. We saw Bud Herseth sitting in the principal trumpet chair, the legendary Frank Miller as principal cello, et cetera. But it's such a great thing. I could turn into a total fangirl when I see some of these videos, because I met some of these legendary musicians, of course, late in their career, but here they are, early in their careers, and just playing the crap out of this piece. The audio is not so great because of the quality of the original tape and the transfer. We did the best we could, and that's actually one of the reasons why we didn't show this, because the performance quality is fine, but the audio quality of the video isn't the greatest. But I love watching these. I love watching these old videos.
fantastic. And then Frank, I'd like very much for you to also tell us about the importance of that passion for archivists. And I see Dr. Davis has a question. Hi, Dr. Davis.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Yes.
Oh, good. Thank you. It was a great recording. I enjoyed it 100%. But the one thing which I noticed is, compared to today, the entire string section was all male. I didn't see one female.
You're exactly correct. So in 1962, we probably would have had maybe about, certainly less than 10 women in the orchestra, and certainly I think Barbara Fraser was the first woman in the violin, the first violin section, and she didn't come along until the mid 1960s. If you're testing me a little bit, but I think I remember that correctly. So we had a few women in the orchestra between 1892 and 1940, but they were mainly second harp, which was not a fully rostered position. And a couple of times the second harpist was actually the wife of the principal harpist, but she was only hired as needed. It wasn't a fully rostered position. The first fully rostered position wasn't until 1941, when Helen Cotis was hired as principal horn. And during World War II, when a number of musicians had to temporarily leave the orchestra for military service, that's the first influx of women into the orchestra. And I think like I said, the most we had during that era was probably just less than 10. Mary Sauer, of course, was our principal keyboard, initially hired in 1957 as an as-needed player, but then that position became fully rostered later in the 1960s. At the moment, the male to female ratio in the orchestra is about 60-40, 60% men, 40% women. And of course, today you will see a number of women in the string sections. We haven't had a woman in the bass section yet, but certainly women in the violins, viola, and cello sections. But yeah, that's a very astute observation. Those were all men. And also, this being 1962, a number of those musicians probably had been in for quite some time. and a number of them were actually hired by Frederick Stock, our second music director, who we're going to talk about a little bit later.
It was not meant as a negative comment, but just
Oh,
an
no.
observation. Yeah.
Yep.
Thank
Very
you
astute
very much.
observation. Yep, my
Thank
pleasure.
you.
Okay, so, and Frank, also then, as I mentioned before, maybe you can, as I read these job descriptions of archivists, maybe you can, tell us about why this dedication to the organization is so important. Because when you talk about that, I mean, you are just completely passionate about this Chicago Symphony Orchestra, and I imagine that that is a very important, that dedication is an important part of the job, even though we won't hear about it in these job descriptions. So anyways, this is what does an archivist do is the roundtable discussion. And to get an idea of what an archivist does, I'm going to read from some job postings. This is the J. Paul Getty Trust, who are looking for a special collections archivist. Quote, the Getty Research Institute seeks a motivated, collaborative, and knowledgeable archivist to process and catalog special collections related to modern and contemporary art history with a focus on African American art, with the goal of promoting collection discovery, access, preservation, and use. The archivist will apply professional standards and best practices to arrange, rehouse, and describe mixed format collections, including the archives of artists, curators, collectors, dealers, educators, and scholars, such as Marin Hassinger, E.J. Montgomery, and Betty Saar, among others. The archivist will participate in activities related to the African American Art History Initiative, a program focused on the history, practices, and cultural legacies of artists of African American and African diasporic heritage, and may contribute to other scholarly outreach and collection management activities related to the special collection. So that is the first one. That is for the J. Paul Getty Trust Special Collections Archivist. The second one is from Paramount, and they are looking for an archives digitizer. Quote, this freelance position will be responsible for digitizing archival content using the new SAMMA, S-A-M-M-A, automated ingest system, and the Archives Media Asset Management, MAM system. This person will be trained to pull and clean the cassette tapes and confirm the content needs to be digitized in the Archives Media Asset Management system. They will apply new barcodes to the cassette and scan them into the ingest system, monitor their progress, and then confirm the files were created properly. They will then move the newly created files to an automatic watch folder, which will send them to the AWS, which is the automatic watch system, I guess. They will then mark these ingested assets as complete in the media asset management system on an associated Excel document. So thank you very much for your patience as I read those. Frank,
Those are very, very, very specific.
So tell me, do any of those job descriptions sound familiar to you? What is your job description and how does it differ from other archivists?
Yeah, so I mean, absolutely, these job descriptions sound familiar, but the interesting thing about both of those institutions, the Getty Trust and of course, Paramount, those are extremely large organizations with probably large archival staffing. I'm an army of one here in the archival community. We call that a lone arranger. Get it? So certainly my job encompasses some of these things, but as an army of one, as a lone arranger, I get to wear all of the hats instead of just these two very very small, very specific hats. So in essence, the nature of my job is to preserve and to provide access. So preservation can be any number of things. Certainly some of the older materials in our collection require certain level of certain standard of care, storing old paper materials in acid-free containers in a temperature and humidity controlled environment, with old photographs, of course, making sure that they're stored in Mylar sleeves and they're not, touching things that would cause them to acidify further or deteriorate. With audio, of course, we have a wide variety of audio formats in our collection. What we get now, of course, it's all, digital, but in our collection, we have tape, a number of different formats, of different sizes, including cassette tapes, which is, it's not the greatest quality, but the best part about a cassette tape, of course, was its portability. So you didn't have to, you could, carry it around with you, put it in your car, have a little, handheld, Walkman or something like that. Thankfully, we don't have any cylinder recordings. That technology predates our history. We don't have any wire recordings. That also kind of predates our history. So the earliest thing we have are things on disc, 78 and 80 RPM disc, both commercial and non-commercial. All kind, like I said, all kinds of tape, from the large reels to small DAT tapes. And then, of course, even in digital formats, we have a couple of different formats. We have commercial CDs, we have CDRs. DATs are also digital, even though they are tape. And then, of course, just, WAV files, MP3s, and things like that. So making sure you care for those materials. And like I said, to preserve them, but also to provide access to them, because it's great if everything's nice and pristine and sitting on the shelf, but if nobody can get to it, kind of what's the point of doing this? So that's in a nutshell the essence of what I do here. So in addition to making sure that the materials that we have stored here are safe and secure, I also field inquiries from not only the public, but also the staff, musicians, occasionally the music director, guest artists, etc. So, and these questions can be anything from, junior high school kids working on history fair projects to people working on theses and dissertations. I get a lot of genealogical inquiries. So to grossly generalize, I'll get a phone call, Aunt Susie lived in Chicago and played the violin, so she must have been a soloist with the Chicago Symphony, right? And 9 times out of 10, maybe Aunt Susie didn't perform with the CSO, but maybe she was performed with a community orchestra that performed in Orchestra Hall. Maybe if Aunt Susie, for example, was a professional musician working in the city and was a member of the union, the Chicago local would have, a record of her performance history, and I can redirect the patron to that. And occasionally, Aunt Susie was a soloist, with the CSO, or a sub, or a member of the CSO, or a member of the Civic Orchestra, which is our training orchestra, et cetera, et cetera. So these questions come from all corners of the globe and can be anything from one tiny little question to, larger scale things, people working on, things that require huge chunks of our performance history as data for a research project or something like that. But yeah, we've gotten calls from, let's see, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire called us once. Jeopardy called us once. Actually, when I first started working here, before a lot of things were on our computers, I got a phone call from a man asking for the performance dates when Judy Garland appeared in Orchestra Hall under the Allied Arts series, which is now our Symphony Center Presents series. It turns out, she did a series of 8 concerts here in 1958. I didn't have that information at my fingertips, so I said to this man, "Oh, let me get your name and your phone number and I'll call you back." The man was Sid Luft, who was Judy Garland's 3rd husband, who was the producer of those concerts. This was in 1993, 94. So Sid Luft, called. So I looked the dates up for him, called him back. He was very polite, very, very gracious. So you never know who's going to be on the other end of the email or the phone call.
And Frank, tell us a little bit about, you're kind of we think of archivists as people that are kind of hidden, as you said, a lone arranger. What is it like then if you have, I guess, a year-end review? Do you have your own initiatives? Or, I mean, compared to those job descriptions we had, those job descriptions were about clear campaigns. You know, they want to get this material from cassette digitized. They want this African-American exhibition, you know, to be, you know, put into its own house. What is that like to you? Do you say, you know, listen, I want to do this. This is important that this happen. I mean, do you direct your own initiatives? Do you have campaigns, or, you know, are you pretty much, as you said, in that reactive position by the phone?
It's kind of half and half. I certainly have a performance evaluation. I report to our vice president of operations, and I certainly try to have some things that are measurable on my performance review. So it's, you know, it's much easier to evaluate if there are measurable things on it. But then there are a number of things that we can't predict in this industry. You know, things change. Music directors relinquish their posts, and, you know, programs change, and things like that. So we're actually in the midst of implementing a new digital asset management system. Well, I say new, it's not, it's new to us. We haven't had one previously. So this is the first time we're doing it. So it's a way to manage all of our digital assets. You know, we know how to manage paper assets. We know how to manage, you know, physical recordings. Managing digital assets, of course, is the next thing. And the best thing about this, it'll just make so many things so much more accessible, not only to staff, but eventually to, you know, to our patrons. So they'll be able to look at old program books online. They'll be able to do performance history searches. They'll be able to watch videos and listen to recordings, you know, from the comfort of their own computer. So we're in the midst of implementing that now, and the learning curve is huge. It's absolutely huge for all of us. So we certainly have some specific goals lined up in order to try to have that ready to go at a certain period of time. Some of the deadlines have been moved a little bit, just because we had an idea of what we were getting into, but not completely, as we've learned. One of the goals was to have all of our digital assets from 2010 forward ingested into the system. We are on track to hit that goal by September. Will all of the metadata be in there and accurate and searchable? You know, remains to be seen. Well, one of the things that it's going to be tremendously helpful for is photographic materials. So, for example, we'll hire we have a staff photographer, but then we also hire other photographers. But a photographer spends, you know, the day here on the opening weekend of a concert. So we've got rehearsals. There might be a pre-concert reception. There might be some backstage photos. There's certainly the concert. There's the, you know, bows afterwards. There's backstage after the concert. There might be a post-concert event. All of those things happen for one day, and it can be anywhere from 150 to 1,000 images. And the best time to catalog those images, of course, is the next day when the event is still fresh in our minds. Luckily, this software has facial recognition available, but facial recognition isn't perfect. If you've used Facebook, you know, it can certainly identify faces, but sometimes it gets them wrong. So we have to double check those, but then we also have to enter the metadata. You know, this is the pre-concert event. This is the concert. What works were being performed? Who was the soloist? Who else is on stage? Who spoke at the post-concert event? You know, do we have any, you know, VIPs who were in attendance who might not have, you know, been directly involved with any kind of presentation or speaking? But we have to get all that information in there and then multiply that by, you know, the last 13 years gives you an idea of the scope, and that's just photographs.
Wow.
You know, that's not brochures and marketing materials and radio broadcasts, because we self-produce our own radio broadcasts. So with radio broadcasts, for example, we've got all the raw material. Then we have the edited versions. We've got the scripts, we've got the interviews, and then the final, you know, radio broadcast. So there's all of those materials as well for a single radio broadcast, of which we produce 52 a year. It's a weekly series. So I'm making myself a little dizzy describing all of this, because it just reminds me of one of my many to-do lists. But at the same time, it's going to be one of those things. It's like when we first got email. When I first started working here, we were still doing things on memos, and not everybody, would receive, the memo. So, and when we first got email, people were like, ugh, I don't know if I can handle this. But once we learned it, and once we started using it, we couldn't live without it. This is going to be the same thing. So it's just getting up and moving with this. But once we get used to it, I'm confident that we will not be able to remember how we ever lived without it.
Incredible. Wow. So a lot of work to be done in the Chicago Symphony Orchestra archive.
Always. Yeah. I've got plenty of job security.
Fantastic. So let's take a look now. We're moving on to our second roundtable. How has the CSO, the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, selected its music directors? Here is the music director, Muti, conducting Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. Wow. Okay. So this leads us into our second roundtable. How has the CSO selected its music directors? As of September 1st, 2023, Riccardo Muti retires from the Chicago Symphony Orchestra and becomes music director emeritus for life. Frank, how has the Chicago Symphony Orchestra chosen music directors in the past, and how have their decisions to hire these music directors worked out?
Before I say that, I have to ever so slightly and politely correct you. Muti is not retiring. Conductors don't retire. That's a dirty word. He relinquishes the title of music director. So it's funny because we always said, Sir George Solti, for example, never retired. You relinquish the position of music director. So yeah, Muti's final concert as music director was just a couple of weeks ago, June 27th. And if I could, I have a couple of little artifacts from that to show you. So when I'm good friends with Muti's assistant, her name's Monica. She's a fantastic human being. We've had a great collaborative relationship over the last several years. So I asked her about a month before Muti's final concert. It was going to be, he was going to do a subscription week in Orchestra Hall, Beethoven's Missa Solemnis for the final subscription concerts. And then 2 days later, one concert in Millennium Park, the big outdoor venue here, free concert for the city. He had begun his music directorship with a similar concert in Millennium Park. We had about 25,000 people in attendance. On June 27th, we only had about 10,000 in attendance, and that was primarily because the air quality index in Chicago was really bad because of the wind from the Canadian wildfires, and so a lot of people in the audience were wearing masks, but we didn't get the same attendance. But still, 10,000 people, that's nothing to sneeze at. But I asked Monica about a month before. I said, after Maestro's final concert in Millennium Park, can I have his baton? Because we have a number of batons in our collection. We have Barenboim's baton from his last concert as music director in 2006. We have a couple of Margaret Hillis batons. We have a couple of Schulte batons. We have Theodore Thomas's baton from the first concert in Orchestra Hall, December 14th, 1904. So I thought this would be a nice little addition to our collection. And my thought was that I would just, the day after the concert, I would go down to Monica's office and she would just hand me this baton. But she mentioned it to Maestro and he mentioned it to somebody else, and then it kind of became this thing. So after, so the plan was when he came off stage at Millennium Park on June 27th after the Tchaikovsky Fifth Symphony, he would, present the baton to me. There would be some words, there would be, some photographers, etc. So there were two works on the program, Florence Price's, a little 8-minute piece by Florence Price, and then Tchaikovsky Fifth. Right before Maestro went on stage, he pulled his baton out of his score and accidentally broke off the tip of the baton. There wasn't time to replace it, and so he just went out on stage, and that's the baton he used. Monica was hoping that he would come off stage after the Price before the Tchaikovsky, but since the Price was so short, he just stayed on stage, even though she was backstage with a second baton, actually the baton that he used for the Missa Solemnis performances. And as we were waiting backstage and he's on stage with Tchaik 5, she's like, well, don't you want this one because it's not broken? And I said, no, I want the broken one because it's a better story. And then I also thought, well, can I have both? The one from the final weekend and then also the one from Tchaik 5. So she said, sure, why not? So he came off stage and he presented me with the two batons, and you can actually see that one is slightly shorter than the other. So this is the one that he used for the 3 performances of Missa Solemnis, and this is the one that he used on June 27th for the Price and Tchaikovsky Fifth Symphony. So these are now part of our collection, and I get to tell that little story. And I also like the broken one because the baton that Theodore Thomas used for the first concert in Orchestra Hall, December 14, 1904, is actually also broken off at the tip. So we don't know the story behind that, but it makes it just a little more interesting to see that.
And Frank, so what's the process then? Now you're going to have to, you have to say, okay, make a description and then put that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So these items will be entered into our catalog. They will be photographed, and they go into a little. I've got a little artifact cabinet in the vault, which is upstairs, temperature, humidity controlled space, about 2/3 of a mile, linear feet of shelving, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, they will be described. They'll go into the catalog, photographed, and then when I give tours, I might pull them out to tell the story that I just told, because it's a great story. But you asked how are music directors chosen? So in 132 years, we have only had 10 music directors, which is kind of, I think, a little fewer than some of our sister orchestras. For example, the New York Philharmonic has had, I should have looked this up, but they've had well over 20 music directors. They're a little older than we are, but they've had, some of the tenures were a little shorter. And we've had our share of long tenures and short tenures. The longest tenure was 37 years. The shortest tenure was 10 months. But Theodore Thomas, of course, was our founder and first music director. And he conducted the orchestra from October 1891 until December 1904. The concert that he conducted for the dedication of Orchestra Hall, December 14th, 1904, was the first of only 5 concerts that he would lead in Orchestra Hall. After that, he did 2 weeks of subscription concerts. The last one, oh yeah, there we go. Thank you very much. The last one being on Christmas Eve, 1904, and it was a Chicago winter. He caught a cold, which became the flu, which became pneumonia, which took his life in January 1905. He was only 69 years old, so his death was unexpected. He had hired Frederick Stock to be a member of the viola section, second chair viola, in 1895, and then he promoted Stock to become an assistant conductor in 1899, and that was mainly to lead some rehearsals, some out-of-town concerts, etc. So when when Thomas died unexpectedly in January 1905, Stock, of course, assumed the position, leading to, oh, sorry about that. That we shouldn't see a 404 error there. That's our website. That's embarrassing. But Stock, assumed the position of music director, leading all of the concerts. And at the time, music director, was exactly that. They led all of the concerts. The concept of guest conductors was, very different back then. So the administration in the early part of 1905, they approached Felix Model, Felix Weingartner, and also Hans Richter to be potential successors. They were all in Europe, and they really didn't have the interest in coming to, the United States to not only to work but also to live. But by then, by early April, the administration realized and the board realized that they had a perfectly capable and an exceptional candidate already doing the job. So they offered the position to Frederick Stock in April 1905. And Stock would hold the position of music director for 37 years until his untimely and unexpected death in 1942, also at the age of 69. And then after that, most of our music directors were guest conductors who had some kind of relationship with the orchestra. They had conducted the orchestra. A few of them had only conducted the orchestra on a handful of occasions. Some of them, like Fritz Reiner, for example, first started conducting the orchestra at the Ravinia Festival in 1937 before he became music director in 1953. So we were hiring people who had a relationship with the orchestra, who the orchestra knew and knew how to work with. The decisions that were made had relative success. I think Desiree Defoe, who initially succeeded Frederick Stock, he was our music director from 1943 until 1947. I think he suffered from the fact that Stock's shoes were just too big to fill. Stock was beloved in the Chicago community. His nickname was Papa Stock. And I think he just kind of suffered a little bit from that comparison. His successor was Artur Rodzinski, who only lasted on the job for 10 months. I don't know. We could talk about Rodzinski for a whole another hour. He was coming from New York, and he just had, I don't know, he had some bones to pick, I think, because he wanted to tear down Orchestra Hall, and he wanted the orchestra to only perform opera, and he was kind of a hothead. It's rumored that he would occasionally bring a pistol on stage with him to rehearsal. There's rumors of that. We don't have anything to substantiate that, but that is a rumor. So management was kind of like, what did we get ourselves into? And his contract wasn't renewed, and he only lasted one season. So, but the one thing that he did do, he did hire Adolf Herseth to be our principal trumpet in the spring of 1948. So Bud Herseth was hired by Rodzinski, but never actually played under him, because when he started in the orchestra in the in the summer of 1948, Rodzinski had already left. So those between 1948 and 1950, there's a little bit of a gap, and part of that is because during that time, management was courting Wilhelm Furtwängler to be our music director. And you might know that name. Furtwängler was the music director of the Berlin Philharmonic during World War II. And I don't want to get into politics or anything, but it's rumored that he had some Nazi affiliation, but then it's also, there's no specific documentation for that. He certainly denounced Hitler after the war, but management was courting him to come and have an extended residency to kind of, test him out. But the challenge that happened after that was virtually every Jewish musician, not only in the orchestra, but also soloists at the time, Vladimir Horowitz, Isaac Stern, Jascha Heifetz, etc. They all signed a petition more or less saying, if you hire this man, we'll never come back to Chicago. So Furtwängler, after a while, just respectfully declined the offer. And then that's when we hired Raphael Kubelik in 1950. Kubelik was very young. He was in his 30s. He's the second youngest music director. Of course, Stock was the youngest. He was 32 when he became music director, but Kubelik was also in his mid-30s. Kubelik started off okay, but he was roasted by the press because he programmed so much new music and was trying a whole bunch of different things. He made some landmark recordings with the orchestra. The Mercury recordings that he made are still so colorful. Our first recording of Pictures at an Exhibition was under Kubelik's baton. And then, of course, after that, Fritz Reiner was our music director during, a spectacular decade in the 1950s and early 1960s. Again, landmark RCA recordings under his baton. Reiner's health took a turn for the worse in 1960. He had a heart attack and had to take some time off, and never completely recovered from that. And that's when we hired Jean Martinot to succeed him in 1963. Again, Martinot, very similar to Kubelik, was not fantastic musician. Again, some really remarkable recordings, but again, was just roasted by the press very unfairly, I think, because he was trying some different things. He's a French conductor, so he tried to steer the orchestra in that direction. A lot of new music that some people weren't so keen on hearing. But then after Martinot, of course, we got lucky and hired Sir George Schulte in 1969. He became our 8th music director. Of course, again, landmark recordings, first taking the orchestra to Europe in 1971, legendary trips to Carnegie Hall, et cetera, et cetera. The transition from Schulte to Barenboim was unique because we were able to announce Barenboim well before Schulte's position was finished. Schulte had announced in the mid-1980s that the 1990-91 season, which was the orchestra's centennial, would be his last as music director. And so Barenboim was approached in the mid to late 1980s, offered the job in late 1988. We announced him as music director designate in January of 1989. So for 2 seasons, really, we had a music director and a music director designate. And Barenboim had a huge history with us. He first appeared in Chicago as a piano recitalist when he was 15 in 1958. He first was soloist with the orchestra in 1965, first conducted the orchestra in 1970. So he had this tremendous history with us and already had a number of recordings in the bank as well. So that was a logical transition. And then, of course, Sir Schulte, not retiring, but becoming music director laureate in 1991 until his death in 1997. Barenboim kind of left us a little high and dry at the end of his tenure. He announced that he was leaving rather abruptly in late 2004, I think it was, and then finished his tenure in the spring of 2006. And nowadays, since these contracts are negotiated so far in advance, it took us a few minutes to find someone. Luckily, between 2006 and 2010, we had Pierre Boulez as our conductor emeritus and Bernard Haitink as our principal conductor, which not quite music director, but still they assumed some of those duties. So these Boulez and Haitink, these 2 legends, we were in good hands during those 4 years. So Muti initially had first conducted the orchestra in the mid-1970s, just a couple of times, but we didn't hear from him again because he was busy in Philadelphia and Italy and London. But he was invited to be a guest conductor in 2007 to do some concerts here in Chicago and also lead the orchestra on tour. And it was kind of love at first sight with the orchestra and Muti. And then in late 2008, we announced him as our designate. He first came as a guest conductor, as music director designate in January of 2009 when he led the Verdi Requiem, which was recorded, which won a couple of Grammys. And then became music director in 2010. So a committee is, on the job. A committee was formed in 2019. Of course, had to take a little break during COVID, but we're actively searching for a new music director. We don't have anyone lined up as of yet. And a lot of people are saying, well, who are we considering? Who are we considering? all you have to do is look at the guest conductor list for the season that just ended, the season that's coming up. That's who we're looking at. We will hire someone, I'm confident, that who has a relationship with us. We're not going to hire someone who comes in, conducts one really great concert, and then we hire them. It's not going to be that. I'm guessing based on our history. Who is it going to be? I don't know. I would love to see a person of color. I would love to see an American. I would love to see perhaps a woman. But bottom line, it has to be the best person for the job. It has to be somebody who works well with the orchestra. It has to be someone who's exciting on the podium and will sell tickets, because we got to sell tickets. I certainly have my opinions who I'd like it to be, but we'll see.
So
A
you do
lot
have
of
a
things have to
favorite.
go into that. Oh yeah. I really like a couple of people who appeared with us this past season. Lahav Shani made a really great impression, I thought. Jakub Prusha, Czech conductor, conducted Mahler Ninth here just a couple of months ago. Fantastic, dynamic conductor. Klaus Mekala, of course, is very popular right now. He did an amazing Mahler 5 with us, but he's only 28. Are we going to hire somebody that young? Maybe. Look at what happened in Los Angeles with Gustavo Dudamel. He was barely in his 20s when they hired him, and he had a great tenure out there. Now he's off to the New York Philharmonic, very soon. I'm just looking at the list from last season. Those are the ones that really jump out at me. Marin Alsop is having a great tenure at the Ravinia Festival. She's our her title is chief conductor out there. She would be an excellent choice. Who knows?
Wow.
Who knows?
Wow.
It's the one thing that I've learned about working here over the course of 3 decades now starting my 4th decade. It's never dull. It's always exciting. It's always new. No 2 seasons are ever the same.
Fantastic. So this leads us to our final roundtable. Frank, this is the work archivists do necessary or a luxury? Frank, we've all heard it before. If you don't learn from history, it will repeat itself. However, today archivists are in the spotlight not because they are protecting obsolete information, but because they are protecting current information. And with that, I want to show something here. This is the National Archives. And I want to read a job summary from them. The National Archives and Records Administration in College Park, Maryland, are looking for an archivist. Summary of the job. This position is part of the National Archives and Records Administration Digitization Division. The incumbent serves in an organizational unit within one of the program offices under the Chief Operating Officer, protecting records and ensuring their proper storage, conservation and reproduction, application of restrictions on records, and creating substantial descriptive products intended to enable discovery and use of records. So Frank, why do you think your work and the work of other archivists is necessary and relevant to our daily lives? Do archivists even protect national security?
Well, again, without getting into politics, of course, this has been in the news as of late with our, former president storing top secret documents in not having them where they're not supposed to be literally for issues of national security. And it's the archivist's job, of course, to not only, like I said before, to preserve, but also to provide proper access to those documents, but especially when things are of a confidential nature, of which those are, that's as confidential as it gets. Of course, I think that the work that I do is important, not only for preserving the orchestra's history, but also to make sure that the organization is headed in the right direction. I'm frequently the person at the meeting, the brainstorm meeting, who sits in the, when something's being discussed, I'm slowly raising my hand saying, we actually did that about 15 years ago. Not to say that we shouldn't examine on how we may do it again, perhaps in a different way, but here's what we did, here's what happened, and here's how it turned out, and this is why we didn't do it anymore, but I'm frequently that that person. But yeah, I mean, you know, you see the piles of, you know, stuff behind me. It's I'm sorry, I have so many different things I want to get in, but I'm also want to be mindful of the time. It's imperative that this stuff is preserved and saved and remembered, if nothing else, in order for this organization to not only survive but also to thrive. I'm not one of the I don't, in the archives, I don't sell anything. I'm not an income generating part of the organization. However, I provide support to all of the other aspects of the organization that do sell tickets, raise money, etc. I'm the person who, you know, beefs up the program book in order to provide a little historical contents. I'm the person who proofreads the brochure to make sure that when we refer to our history, we're referring to it correctly. But also I can say, oh, we're doing Mahler 7th on the program next season. Hey, we actually did the US premiere of Mahler's 7th in 1907, and here's a review of that performance, and here's a image of the score that was used, and it was conducted by Frederick Stock, and, you know, blah blah blah. So I'm the person who, you know, hopes to beef things up a little bit in order to sell the tickets, in order to raise the money, in order to make sure that this organization continues, you know, to not only survive, but like I said, thrive.
Wow. Okay. So thank you so very much to Frank Villella.
It's my pleasure.
So let's see how we can stay in touch with Frank. So Frank, we've got your website here. It's a CSO website, and it's cso.org. And there's your photo and all that. And look, Schulte conducts Mahler 8. So
yeah, that's a recent radio broadcast.
So we can reach out to you somewhere here if people have
Yeah,
any
absolutely.
questions.
Actually, in the first paragraph of the bio, if you click on the hyperlink, that sends me an email.
Fantastic.
It brings up a form where you can, you know, send me an email.
Fantastic. So feel free then to reach out to Frank with your
Absolutely.
questions or comments. He is there. Obviously, this is an incredible, he's an incredible asset to the Chicago Symphony Orchestra and to all of us. So again, thank you, Frank. Let's take a look and see what's coming up next Wednesday. It is Christine Jensen. Can Girls Play the Blues? A Black female heavy metal frontwoman, a white male soul singer. Even in the now ubiquitous diversity, equity, and inclusion bureaus, those two propositions sound off key. Music unites us, but it also divides us. And those with the wrong appearance have a tough time gaining membership to the club named genre. Luckily for the jazz scene, saxophonist Christine Jensen is an unapologetic band leader with a new outlook at jazz modernity. Christine will present her just-released album, Day Moon, a songbook carefully crafted over 2 years of pandemic confinement, and show us how girls, too, can play the blues. That's next Wednesday. It's Christine Jensen, Can Girls Play the Blues? And all information, as always, about upcoming shows can be found at www.simeonmoro.com. Once again, thank you so very much to Frank Villella. Thank you to Frederick and Victoria Mulligan, as well as Agnieszka and Benoit Rivolet for their support of this show. Most of all, thanks to you, our participants who make it all worthwhile from New London, New Hampshire, and Chicago, Illinois. Goodbye, and see you next time.
Thank you very much.
See you next time.